Hi, I'm Cynthia Nichols, the Regional Public Engagement Specialist from the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. Thanks for joining us today on Views from Ukraine, where we're going to be discussing the topic of energy. After 45 minutes, our panelists are going to go into private breakout rooms to answer questions from the media and attendants. As a reminder, the panel is recorded and streamed on the U.S. Embassy Kyiv social media, but the breakout rooms are not. All conversations are on the record. If you are in our main Zoom session, please remember to mute your microphone and turn off your cameras. It's been nearly a year since Putin's unjustified and brutal war on Ukraine began. At this point, we know Putin's playbook: wreak havoc, death and destruction, target infrastructure, freeze and starve Ukraine civilians, and force them from their homes while driving up food and energy costs. It's all an attempt to freeze out and terrify Ukraine. But Putin's actions are having more impact than just on Ukraine. We have some distinguished guests with us here today to discuss just that. First, Natalia Boyko, who is advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine and a member of the Supervisory Board of NJSC Naftogaz of Ukraine. Next, we have Serhiy Povrovsky, who is the principal expert on energy efficiency financing and policy at UNIDO, and is the vice chair at the UNECE group of experts. Finally, we'll have Volodymyr Kudrytsky, the chief investment strategy officer at NPC Ukrenergo. And unfortunately, he must leave early. So Volodymyr, the first question is going to go to you. Could you tell us about the impact that these missile strikes that we have been seeing have made on the critical infrastructure of Ukraine?
Thank you very much. Hello, dear colleagues. Since 10th of October, as you probably know, Russia has launched an absolutely unprecedented campaign against Ukrainian electric grid. They launched around 1,000 missiles and kamikaze drones targeting specifically electric grid and power plants. And that caused massive damages and destruction in our system. There is no such a thermal or hydropower plant that has not been damaged over this 3.5 months. And also, of course, they targeted many important substations that we operate as a power grid operator. Some substations were hit 10 and even 15, 20 times. And as a result of this vicious campaign and vicious attacks, we have quite a large deficit of generation in the grid. We have lost a lot of generation capacity as a result of these attacks. Some generation was lost even before due to occupation of some regions by Russians, and we are speaking here about Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, for example, which is the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. But some power plants were destroyed or damaged already in the course of these attacks. So now we, as an operator, have to introduce rolling power cuts to maintain this balance between generation and consumption at every moment of time. Without this balance, power system cannot operate, it would collapse. So it is our job to make sure that power system is still up and running. And the only instrument that we have left in our hands is, of course, this rolling disconnections of certain groups of customers, including businesses and households that are subject to this rolling power cuts. And I can tell you that at every moment of time, several million Ukrainians do not have access to electricity. And of course, this causes a lot of suffering and a lot of negative consequences also for Ukrainian economy, depresses the business activity in the country. And also, of course, Russian main intent is to cause full and long-term blackout in the country. It causes large humanitarian catastrophe so that Ukrainians during wintertime would not be able to use electricity, water, heating, and other benefits of civilization, other basic services of civilization. So this is where we have this. This is where the energy front is outlined, and this is why we are working all together to prevent this from happening.
It seems to have been a very impactful. Millions of Ukrainians are being impacted by this. So, and it takes a lot of ingenuity to be able to repair the system that quickly and efficiently. So, could you tell us what it's actually like to repair the grid? I'm sure it is more than just flipping a switch. You have all of these power stations. What does it entail?
Well, if you look at the situation with the from the position of our maintenance worker at substation, it happens so that you hear air raid siren or alarm, you go into the shelter, and then you see 1, 2, sometimes 5 explosions from above. Then you go out in 2, 3, maybe 5 hours. You see the equipment, high voltage equipment, damaged, burning. You wait until fire teams will allow you to start repair works, and then you restore the substation. You spend a week, sometimes 2 weeks, a month to restore the basic functionality of the substation, to restore it from this massive destruction, and then you probably get another hit, and you start it from the scratch again and again. So, and of course, many people at substations and also even in the administrative buildings, they are exposed to military risks. Unfortunately, we've lost several colleagues in the course of this campaign against electric grid as a result of these missile attacks. And these people, they are literally risking their lives trying to restore the system and keep the lights on in the homes of Ukrainians. So it's a real, literal energy front, and these people who are dying at the workplace trying to restore lights in the homes of Ukrainians, they are in the same battlefield as our brave soldiers.
Indeed. We often talk about the heroes on the front lines, but we forget about the heroes at home as well. And I'm very sorry for your lost colleagues. I'm sure it takes a lot of ingenuity to come up with a response in fixing these worst case scenarios in Ukraine. What is that like? And then what kind of support does Ukraine need to be able to restore power and water and heat this winter?
Well, first of all, and it may sound surprising for you, but the biggest factor that allowed us to restore the power grid quicker than they are able to destroy it is air defense. And of course, air defense systems that were supplied over the recent few months to Ukraine from our Western allies and partners, they changed the gameplay completely. And the more air defense systems we have, the less is the probability that someone will be killed and that some important equipment or energy objects will be damaged and millions of Ukrainians will be without lights. Second element, of course, is equipment. We had a very large stock of equipment before the invasion. We were preparing ourselves for this invasion, for the war. But of course, due to the large scale of the destruction, we are running out of this stock, and we have to replenish it using Western supplies. And we are working closely with our partners all around the world to make sure that the needed equipment is going to Ukraine as soon as possible to allow us to continue restoration works, not to stop these works. And the third element is, as I said, we have a deficit of power in the system currently, but on the other hand, we are connected to European power grid since the start of invasion, and That means that we can import electricity from Europe, and currently we use around 400 megawatts of imports to compensate partially this deficit that we have in the system. However, the potential, the technical potential is much larger, few times larger than the current import capacity. So we are working with our European colleagues to allow for more import to come to Ukraine this winter, because we need more imports to balance our system to eliminate this deficit of power that we currently have. These are three important elements: air defense, equipment, and import capacity, that we need to increase our chances to be victorious in this campaign against the electric grid.
Absolutely. And if I recall correctly, you went from Russia's energy infrastructure to European infrastructure about 3 hours before the war began. How did that switch impact the energy infrastructure within Ukraine, especially in pertaining to the attacks that we're seeing, as well as the energy deficits?
Well, of course, after we connected our system to European grid, and that happened 3 weeks after the start of invasion. We disconnected 4 hours before the invasion started, but connected to European grid 3 weeks after it started. This is a major factor of Ukrainian power grid resilience. First of all, in the extraordinary situations, we use European power grid to balance our system. For example, during missile attacks, of course, we rely very much on European power grid in such situations. We can use some technical flows from European system to keep the balance inside Ukraine during the attacks. Secondly, as I said, we are able to import electricity from Europe to compensate for this persistent deficit of power that we have in the system due to the destruction of power plants. And we look forward to increase this import capacity to use European resources even to a bigger extent. And of course, when we restore control over generation assets, and I hope this will happen very soon, we will recover our ability to generate energy, and we will become an exporter of electricity in the future. And this will make Ukraine a very important element of regional energy security. So it's not only Ukraine, I think it's the whole Europe which will benefit from this interconnection between Ukraine and the EU.
Thank you. And I know that you have several important meetings that you have to be at and have to dial out. But thank you for joining us today on our session for Views for Ukraine. We appreciate all the work that you're doing for your country. Sergey, I'm going to hand it to you. How do you think that the change from the energy grid from being on Russia's energy grid to being on Ukraine, how do you think that is going to reshape Ukraine's energy sector?
Well, I think that Volodymyr already provided a very valuable input, how important it was, and I think that was a huge success by Ukrenergo to do that. That was called, we joined NCE, and that was very needed. However, when he was describing this situation, and because we are recalling the events of February 2022, I remember about another information campaign launched by Russia, because they were trying to do all mean things they could. They also distributed this scam that all consumers need to switch off all electric appliances and their devices and switch off the consumption for the certain hour. And this is also very dangerous for the system, as it was those times. That's why I think that even with this event, we are trying to mitigate the negative effects, not just the war and all the missiles launched on energy infrastructure in Ukraine, but also the lies and information campaign that Russia continues to do to basically put Ukraine into the most negative light. But in terms of your questions and in terms how this will impact, I also generally believe that with the recovery that we will have post-war, Ukraine will become actually an exporter to EU electricity market. And we had assets for that. Unfortunately, those assets were, at this moment were either destroyed or stolen. So we are not just talking about destruction or damage of power generation assets, but we're also talking about the basically burglar behavior, because Volodymyr mentioned about Zaporizhia nuclear power plant that is temporarily occupied by Russians, and that is not delivering into the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. But also there was a huge damage of renewables in Ukraine. And I think that this is part of the energy strategy and the future for Ukraine, that we will increase the component for renewables in our energy mix and in our generation. So those renewable assets that were located in southern and eastern parts of Ukraine, they were either damaged because of the war or stolen by Russians. And there were facts that happened. But I still hope that we will reach the post-war recovery phase soon. And in that phase, yes, we will have to be dedicated on creating a flexible and resilient energy system with essentiation on renewables.
Absolutely. Ukraine has a lot of wind power as well, and it's very interesting to see it on the horizon. Natalia, can you tell us what about Ukraine's energy strategy moving forward? What do we see for the next 10 years as Ukraine recovers from this?
The great thing is that we actually are moving from the previous question to the current one. Because, for example, the integration with NSOE was a very important part of the strategy of the development of energy sector of Ukraine. Because due to association agreement, Annex 27 that we implement in Ukraine, the idea was to integrate both gas and electricity market from the current post-Soviet standards to European, and integrate not just from the technical side, but also from the legal side. So the main idea is, of course, to be the part of European markets. That's why the movement from the post-Soviet structure connecting to the Russia Federation to the European one was a very, very important for us. And it was really critical. And I think it's very symbolic that it's happened exactly in the period when Russia showed the real face of themselves. Unfortunately, the current energy strategy of Ukraine is much different from what we was having on our tables a year ago. But I think the general situation in Europe and in the world changed also, because from the very romantic green discussions, we moved to the situation when the energy security and resilience sit on as an head on the table, because the Ukrainian situation shows that without energy security, without resilience, without diversification of sources, you cannot just cover the needs that might happen if, for example, Russia Federations will make attacks on your infrastructure. And when we're talking about Ukraine, of course, now we are fighting with unprecedented attacks. But for example, the cyber attacks that was initiated by Russia Federation a lot of times, they are not just focused on Ukraine, but in general. And I think that what was happening with Europe last couple of years, it's also attack, the different one, but the impact of Russians to the energy market, the fairy tale about cheap gas as the best friend. The result is actually the new dialogue about the new energy strategy. That's why Ukrainian energy strategy for next 10 years is very practical. So we don't know in which status and which technical situation will Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant be back to Ukraine, unfortunately. But it's very important part of the strategy because the Zaporizhzhia power plant is 6 gigawatt of generation. It's a huge impact to the whole system. So for the next 10 years, probably we need to build 2 more nuclear blocks and at one of Ukrainian stations. We need to build so-called decentralized generation, the small generation in the different regions that will help us to be more sustainable. But here the idea is to use biogas, biotechnologies, probably burn waste, so to make it with new technologies and just move from coal to the new different story. Of course, the development of renewables, sun and wind, but the strategy now is that we need to build new renewable technologies together with energy storage technologies, and also we need to develop the big hydro, because Ukraine has a very great big hydro potential. And now when the system goes down because of Russians attack, actually the main source that put the system up is the big hydro and hydro accumulation stations. So it will be nice to develop the Dnistrovska hydro accumulation stations, and also to build one more in the center of Ukraine on the Dnipro River. So it's from the technical side what we will have, but of course European standards, European market regulation, and the part of European world, that's the only way.
That's a good point. Trying to align with the European strategy. Since the start of the war, a lot of economies have worked to find reliable and sufficient energy sources. Sergei, what has the impact of Russians' weaponization of energy had on economic growth for Ukraine?
This is really good question, because we look at that like many people look at the energy infrastructure. Okay, we just supply energy, but the consequences of the attacks and the damage of energy infrastructure, they do have economic and social effect, very negative effect. So what happens that you don't have energy resources available for production of goods and for living. So one thing that we already heard, that as a social impact, the intention of the Russians was just to damage the critical infrastructure and to let people freeze out during the winter. But and this is true. I mean, this is one of the most negative effects, when people were not able to have heating or electricity supplied to their households. But another thing, and it's deeper and more damaging, because suddenly the business cannot work the way it still could work. And with that, we have the situation when businesses are in a unprecedented danger, and this influences the economy, the very important protection shield of our independence. It's more economic. Businesses cannot function, they cannot provide employment, they cannot produce the goods, or if they do, the way how they do that became more expensive, and that expense definitely go down to the change to the consumers, because like producing electricity using diesel generators or any temporary solutions, first of all, it's hugely expensive. It's not reliable, you cannot do that in the quantity that you need, and it's hugely expensive. And that's why and I don't know if that was purposeful thinking, but I feel like I do, that they really wanted to create a situation when Ukrainian economy shatters, or people are forced to leave Ukraine. So they basically force Ukrainians out of the country, or create conditions they cannot, Ukrainians cannot live in their own country. But we are very resilient, showing the resilience, the top of resilient records. And I know businesses are trying to survive, but they do need help. And
Speaking of resilience and capacity, how has Europe managed to maintain like the industrial capacity and the energy capacity when we have Russia's attempt to weaponize gas and energy supplies? Could either of you touch on that?
Well, first of all, I think this is more funny story, because Russians always told, or Europeans will freeze out during this winter, they will learn their lessons, they will just come begging us to turn on the gas supply, because all those insinuation that they did with the Nord Stream 2, well, outside it was criminal. It was also a terroristic attack. So basically, they threatened European countries. Outside of what they are doing in Ukraine, they continue threatening European countries or any countries around the world, just showing, oh, you're too much dependent. And the best thing what Europe did, outside of climate really helping the situation, they just choose a smarter solution. So they redistributed or reviewed the distribution, energy distribution, and energy supply sources. And I think everybody will come much stronger from out of this situation. Everybody.
So are these missile and drone strikes having impact on energy costs in Europe?
Natalia, well, because yeah, please.
Actually, yes. And what we saw with the prices on electricity and gas is, of course, the situation that we expect, but you never can be for 100% ready to explain to your population in any minute that independence costs a lot and you need to pay more because of diversification of sources. And unfortunately, the Russia propaganda was trying to put argues on, yes, now you will cover with your own money the Ukrainian scenario, etc. But the good news is that we have a huge support, and of course, there are a lot of problems. For example, the Hungary question is very interesting, is always in the focus. But still, a lot of countries, they are ready to pay. And unfortunately, the current situation is happening after coronavirus crisis, and the economical situation in general is complicated. But still,
it's very complicated. Are we seeing a lot of global trends or policy changes regarding the electrical supply and how it's being dealt with?
We do, and the energy efficiency is important, and people need also to invest in energy efficiency. But still, the question of tariffs and prices is very complicated, and a lot of countries, they have turbulence connecting to that with their own politicians. But it's very important that the spirit of Ukrainian support and the democratical spirit that is actually the main in Europe, and that's why still politicians are supporting us, people are supporting us, people are supporting Ukrainians with children who are now spending almost a year in the different countries far from home. And the most important thing is that we have now weapon and the support of Ukrainian army is growing, and that's the only chance for us to fight and to win.
I agree. It's important for us to remember that freedom is not free. There are costs associated with that.
And this is one of the
to
most
your
valuable things. I mean, there is nothing more valuable than freedom. And here in Ukraine, we understand it very, very well. And I think those minor incremental costs that could happen with and without the war in Ukraine, in terms of increase of power pricing, that could happen anyways. And one thing that is also very important to remember and to understand, that being blackmailed by Russia is the worst scenario that could happen to EU markets, because they were basically blackmailed. Yes, it was different pricing for different European countries, as everybody figured out at the end, and that's why Germans had the preferences in prices for gas. But now, once again, what I really would like to accentuate, others were simply blackmailed by Russia. They said, oh, your economy would crash without our gas supply. This didn't happen. Once again, European politicians found a smarter solution how to do that, and we can see that European economy is growing actually, and avoided any possible threats or scary stories told by Russians. So this didn't happen. This also will not happen in Ukraine. And once again, I'm positively sure that we will come strong out of this situation.
And one more funny thing, sorry, I just remember.
Absolutely, go ahead.
We have such a spirit that connects people. For example, probably you saw in internet the support of Ukrainians to the new Czech Republic president. So we are so lucky that we have such a supportive politicians that will lead the country for next couple of years. So I think now the feeling of the spirit between the different countries and nations is very unique, and it's even much more important that Russia propaganda still trying to explain us that cheap gas is much more important than your principles, but they fail.
The spirit of the Ukrainian people is just indomitable. Like it's just so powerful. So let's talk about the spirit of Ukrainians and the humanitarian crisis that is coming from the lack of electricity and heat and the rolling blackouts. Could you touch on what it's like for Ukrainians to live without power, just so our audience understands? Either one.
It's just just new normal. So you know that in your apartment you have a lot of water and technical water and special foods and candles and gasoline and generators and different sources to heat yourself, and it's just the different life. But the thing is that actually we are lucky because it's much more warm than we expected, and this winter is super warm, and we didn't expect that, being super frank. So yes, it's not very comfortable. You are not able to make, I don't know, like in a wash machine or some heat the water when you like or need it. You need to have a schedule. But we have such a joke that the best motivator coach in Ukraine is Ukrenergo and electricity supply, because your schedule is perfect. You know when to heat the water, you know when to wash your hands, you know when you will have light, so you are super efficient and you know your schedule exactly.
Yeah.
So it impacts your daily lives, but that ingenuity that Ukrainians have when
the joke actually goes like, nobody taught me time management as Ukrenergo did. So yeah, but I don't want to share any of those experiences simply because, from communication that I'm running worldwide, and like, for example, my colleagues at the head office, they sincerely thoughtful about the situation we are here. So the biggest inconvenience when suddenly you simply disappeared from an important Zoom meeting or team meeting, but nobody can understand what's going on here if you're not in this situation. So we can tell you stories, we can try to explain, even Natalia tried to explain, but this is very far from what actually happens. And you will understand this only when you are in a situation like that. But once again, you can see we are surviving. We're just not going to be desperate or dramatic about that. The only thinking I'm having, like, as post factum out of this situation is like, we really become stronger. All these skills, hopefully they will be useless soon, because you just start thinking, okay, where will you be implementing all this crisis management skills and everything? But yeah, the situation cannot be explained or described. It's really difficult, and specifically for some regions where we have more deficit. And as it was mentioned, Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is 6 gigawatt of installed capacity right now, and those were just recent figures. We have 7 gigawatt of deficit during peak time. And so this is really huge, like really huge. But once again, Ukrenergo is doing their best, and they were the best time management feature for Ukrainians.
But I see also the couple of very good things. For example, yes, for your own life management, it's a strange period, but not that important. What is for me personally important? People are thinking now about energy efficiency, and people are thinking about their own energy supply with the right logic. So I think that first time in the history of independence of Ukraine, people understand connection between the source and their own life. So there is always it was always a big problem in Ukraine because of cheap prices for electricity and gas for population. The understanding that the source is expensive and you cannot use the source without understanding that it's reasonable is not effective. So now I hope that the situation will be game changer, and it will be the great like a push and crash test for each of us for the new level of consumption. That's the one important thing. The second important thing is the regional level of development. Now the municipalities and the regional people, they understand more that diversification should crimp regions, and if you very much dependence from one source far away and something will happen, you are very fragile. So the logic of development of small project is now very popular, and I hope that if we will have the access for financing for such a projects, the new era of small energy projects that will be driving the regions will finally happen.
Fantastic. Well, we're at time right now. Final thoughts, Serhii, how about it?
Well, actually, that's what Natalia brought me to. I think this is the key thing to make to protect our energy system and to help our energy security and resilience of our energy system is basically focus on development of diversified energy supply points. And of course, do not forget about about batteries. So helping businesses, helping small businesses and households with connecting their renewables together with the batteries to the system. So that all will help energy security. And about financing, yes, from one hand, this drastic situation a bit helped in my professional career, because yes, people finally start, not only people, but also government officials started to understand the difference between renewable energy and energy efficiency. But energy efficiency should be an integral part of whatever we're trying to implement and do with the energy system, because the essence of energy efficiency is you consume in a smart way. You use energy resource in a smart way, in the most efficient way, and in this way you will consume less. And that's why Natalia is absolutely right. We even have seen this mindset difference at the regional level, when regional municipality understood that their community is very much linked to the energy supply, but also to the functioning of the business. And the business also needs energy to provide employment, to make the product, and to contribute to the community development. So the donor support, the support of IFIs, the support of UN agencies, we really need to do more for Ukraine, and really should look at this project as cross-connected, thin energy, economy, social benefits. And with that, yeah, I think we must employ more developments of regional projects for additional energy supply and for energy efficiency installations.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time in this part of our panel for today. A hearty thank you to our panelists who were able to attend. If our guests will switch to their Zoom room, that our journalists will be able to join you and further the conversation there. To everyone who is not in the Zoom room, thank you for watching Views from Ukraine. Please join us next Wednesday at the same time for another panel. Thank you so much.